Welcome to Tales That Terrify, the podcast that turns your deepest fears into chilling reality. Every week, we bring you fresh, unsettling stories designed to haunt your imagination. From whispers in the dark to the horrors just beyond your sight, these tales will leave you questioning what lurks in the shadows. Want more nightmares? Dare to explore our YouTube channel for even more spine-tingling stories. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and prepare for this week's descent into terror. I'm not the kind of person who's easily scared. Living alone has given me a sense of independence that I cherish. I spend most of my time in the quiet comfort of my apartment, playing video games, reading about identity, and researching things that make the world feel just a little more knowable. I've always been an animal lover, too, with my cat Kiko keeping me company. It's a calm, routine life, though I can't say I'm immune to occasional curiosities, especially when it comes to the idea of identity. I've talked with both Christians and Buddhists over the years, sometimes seeking a bit of wisdom, sometimes questioning my own beliefs. But recently, everything started to change. It began with a strange sensation, one I couldn't quite place. I'd been researching a new topic, identity in spiritual belief systems, and was up late one night, browsing through obscure forums and old texts. The moonlight shone through my apartment window, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I'd just finished a long discussion with a Buddhist friend about reincarnation and the nature of the soul. It was strange. The whole conversation felt like it had unlocked something deep within me, something that was better left untouched. I pulled out my gaming console and turned on my favorite game, a dark fantasy RPG where I could lose myself for hours. But this time, something was different. The game started to load, but it seemed to take longer than usual. The screen flickered once, twice, and then the loading bar froze. I tried restarting, thinking it was a glitch, but the game wouldn't respond. Frustrated, I decided to check the game's forums for any bugs or issues. But when I pulled up the community page, it was off. The colors were muted, the font appeared foreign, and some of the threads didn't even make sense. One thread caught my eye, the silent player. It seemed like a joke at first, but the more I read, the more uncomfortable I became. The post described an encounter within the game, a player, known only as the silent player, who would appear during late-night sessions. No one ever saw their face. They simply appeared beside you, not in the game world, but in the shadows. Quiet, unmoving, watching. Just close the game and they'll disappear. Don't talk to them. Don't acknowledge them, the post warned. It was absurd. It had to be. Yet, something about it unnerved me. I felt a growing sense of dread in my chest. It was as though the words had unlocked something I couldn't close. I returned to the game, deciding to dismiss it all as a bad joke. But when I logged back in, the game looked different. The landscape was darker, the music was faint and distorted, and the characters, if you could even call them that, moved in jerky, unnatural ways. I played for a few minutes, the tension building in my chest. Then I saw it, a shadow, darker than the rest of the environment, moving along the periphery of my character's view. It was barely noticeable, but I saw it. I froze, my fingers hovering over the controller. The shadow moved closer. I couldn't look away. The silent player wasn't supposed to be real. I'd read the forums, but here they were, standing still in the background watching. I turned the game off, immediately. But when I opened my eyes again, I was back in the game, only this time I was in the middle of an empty field. The sun had set and everything around me was bathed in an eerie red glow. I scanned the horizon. Nothing, but the feeling was suffocating. My heart raced, my palms were slick with sweat. I heard something, a whisper, soft at first but growing louder. It wasn't in the game though, it was inside my head. "You're not who you think you are." I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. My cat, Kiko, jumped up onto the desk, meowing for attention. But it wasn't her usual comforting meow. It was different, distorted, like the voice inside my head. I glanced at her, and she stared back at me with unblinking eyes, her pupils dilated. I had to get out. I shut off the console again, breathing heavily. I needed to clear my mind. It was just a game, right? I didn't believe in ghosts or curses, but then I heard it again, the whisper. "You're not who you think you are." This time, the voice was clearer. And I realized something. It wasn't the game that was messing with me. It was something else, something I couldn't see, couldn't escape. I couldn't shake the thought that I had unlocked something during my research. Something about identity, something about who we really are when we strip away everything, the body, the beliefs, the names we hold on to. I had been searching for answers, but now it felt like something darker was answering me instead. I grabbed my phone, desperate for any grounding. I texted my Buddhist friend, asking if this was some sort of spiritual test. I stared at the screen for a long time, waiting for a response. The silence was unbearable. I turned to Kiko, but she was no longer in the room. The door to the hallway was wide open, even though I was sure I had closed it. I stood up, trembling, and that's when I saw it, a shadow in the corner of the room, the same one from the game. And standing there, with no face, no voice, just the heavy, suffocating presence of something otherworldly, was the silent player. The whisper echoed again in my mind. "You're not who you think you are." I had been warned. I should have listened, but now it was too late. It all started about 4 months after I moved into the tiny house my friend, Jake, had let me stay in on his property. The place was perfect, just under 400 square feet, cozy, and surrounded by nothing but trees and quiet. Jake's property was secluded, about 10 acres of dense woods with a long gravel driveway leading up to his main house. My tiny house was tucked away near the edge of the property, far enough from Jake's place to feel private, but close enough that I didn't feel completely isolated. Or so I thought. The house was well built, with thick insulation that kept it eerily quiet inside. Most nights, the silence was comforting. But that night, it felt suffocating. I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep, my door closed as usual. I had been on FaceTime with my girlfriend, Emily, earlier, but she'd fallen asleep and I'd ended the call. My phone was on the nightstand, the screen dark. The room was pitch black, the kind of darkness where you can't even see your hand in front of your face. I was just starting to drift off when I heard it. Knock, 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 knock. 4 sharp, distinct knocks on the front door. I froze, my heart instantly racing. The sound was unmistakable, 4 deliberate knocks, loud enough to echo through the small space. My mind scrambled for an explanation. It was 3 a.m. Who could possibly be out here? Jake wouldn't come by this late without calling, and even if he did, he'd just text me to let me know. The property was gated, and the nearest neighbor was miles away. I sat up, my breath shallow, and grabbed my phone. My first instinct was to call Jake, but I hesitated. What if it was nothing? What if I was just hearing things? I didn't want to wake him up over what might be my imagination. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the bed and crept toward the front door, my bare feet silent on the cool floor. The tiny house was so small that it only took a few steps to reach the door. I paused, my hand hovering over the lock, and listened. Nothing. Just the faint sound of the wind rustling through the trees outside. I unlocked the door and opened it slowly, the cool night air hitting my face. The porch was empty. The motion sensor light above the door flicked on, casting a harsh glow over the small wooden deck. There was no one there. No footprints, no sign of anyone having been there, just the endless trees swaying in the breeze. I stepped outside, the bat still in my hand, and scanned the area. The gravel driveway was empty, the gate at the end still closed. The woods were silent, the kind of silence that feels alive, like it's watching you. I shivered and went back inside, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the trees outside, made my heart race. I told myself it was nothing, maybe an animal, maybe the house settling. But deep down, I knew better. Those knocks had been too deliberate, too real. The next few days were uneventful. I tried to brush off the incident, chalking it up to my imagination or maybe a prank. But then, a week later, it happened again. This time I was wide awake. It was the same time, 3 a.m., and I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself from the eerie silence. And then, just as I was about to put my phone down, I heard it. Knock, 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 knock. 4 knocks, clear, unmistakable. My blood ran cold. I grabbed the bat and rushed to the door, my heart pounding. This time, I didn't hesitate. I flung the door open, the motion sensor light flooding the porch. Again, there was no one there. Just the empty deck and the endless trees beyond. I called Jake the next morning, my voice shaky as I told him what had happened. He listened quietly, then said, "Are you sure it wasn't an animal? Maybe a raccoon or something?" "It wasn't an animal," I said firmly. "It was 4 knocks, like someone was at the door." Jake sighed. "I'll come by tonight and check it out. Maybe it's the wind or something." But when Jake came over that evening, he couldn't find anything out of the ordinary. We walked the property, checked the gate, and even inspected the tiny house for any signs of damage or intrusion. Nothing. The house was solid, the property secure. "Maybe it's just the house settling," Jake said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Tiny houses can make weird noises sometimes." I nodded, but I didn't believe him. The knocks were too deliberate, too consistent, and they always happened at the same time, 3 a.m. The knocks kept coming. Not every night, but often enough to keep me on edge. Always 4. Always at 3 a.m. I started setting up cameras, hoping to catch something, anything that could explain what was happening. But every time I reviewed the footage, there was nothing. Just the sound of the knocks and the door rattling slightly, as if something was pushing against it from the outside. One night, after weeks of this torment, I decided to stay awake and wait. I sat on the couch, the bat in my lap, my eyes glued to the door. The house was silent, the air thick with tension, and then, right on cue, it came. Knock, 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 knock. I leapt to my feet, my heart pounding. This time, I didn't open the door. I just stood there, staring at it, my hands trembling. The knocks were louder this time, more forceful, as if whatever was on the other side was growing impatient. "Who's there?" I called, my voice shaking. There was no answer, just silence. I grabbed my phone and called Jake, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice groggy with sleep. "It's happening again," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "The knocks. They're here." Jake was silent for a moment, then said, "I'm coming over." When Jake arrived, we sat in the tiny house, the air heavy with tension. He looked at me, his face pale, and said, "There's something I need to tell you." My stomach dropped. "What is it?" He hesitated, then said, "Before I bought this property, there was a story about this land. A long time ago, there was a cabin here. The guy who lived in it, he wasn't a good person. He did terrible things. One night, 4 of his victims came to his door demanding justice. They knocked 4 times, and when he didn't answer, they took matters into their own hands." I stared at him, my blood running cold. "What happened?" Jake's voice was barely above a whisper. "They killed him, right here on this land, and before they did, they knocked on his door 4 times. It was their way of letting him know they were coming for him." I felt sick. "Are you saying?" Jake nodded, his eyes filled with guilt. "I didn't want to tell you. I thought it was just a story, but if you're hearing the knocks..." I didn't finish the sentence for him. I didn't need to. The pieces were falling into place, the knocks, the time, the emptiness on the camera feed. It wasn't a person, it was something else. That night, I didn't stay in the tiny house. I packed a bag and went to stay with Emily. But as I left, I heard it one last time. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't turn around. I didn't look back. I just got in my car and drove away. I haven't been back since. The tiny house sits empty now, a silent reminder of what happened. But sometimes late at night, I wonder if the knocks are still happening. If whatever or whoever is out there is still waiting for me to answer. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when Nancy, a diligent project manager at a mid-sized tech firm, was pulled aside by her supervisor, Linda. The office was bustling with activity, employees typing away at their desks, phones ringing in the background. Yet Linda's sudden, urgent tone made everything else feel distant, as if the entire world had paused around them. "Nancy, we need to talk," Linda said, her voice low, almost frantic. Nancy followed her down the narrow corridor toward the break room, a place where private conversations were usually held. Linda closed the door behind them, glancing over her shoulder to make sure no one could hear. She looked over at Nancy with wide, nervous eyes, and Nancy's stomach clenched, sensing something was wrong. "I don't know if I should be telling you this," Linda began, wringing her hands. "But I think you deserve to know. If anyone asks me about this, I'll deny it. Okay?" Nancy blinked, confusion washing over her. "What are you talking about?" Linda took a deep breath before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's someone in the office. Someone has been filming you." Nancy's heart skipped a beat. "Filming me? What do you mean?" Linda leaned in closer, lowering her voice even further. "It's your coworker, Sarah. She's been secretly recording you for weeks now. Not just the meetings, not just the presentations. She's been following you around, capturing everything, every move you make." Nancy felt the blood drain from her face. Sarah, her seemingly quiet and professional coworker, had always seemed a bit distant, but the idea that Sarah had been filming her in secret, it was chilling. "Why would she do that?" Nancy asked, her voice barely a whisper. Linda's eyes flickered nervously. "I don't know, but she was told to keep it quiet, told not to let you know. I thought you deserved to know, especially since it's happening right under your nose." Nancy's mind raced, her thoughts swirling like a tornado. She wanted to demand answers, to confront Sarah immediately. But something held her back. "What does she want with the footage?" she asked, the question hanging heavy between them. Linda shook her head, eyes wide. "I don't know. All I know is that this isn't the first time it's happened. It's been happening in other departments too. People have noticed things missing, emails not sent, and sometimes they catch a glimpse of her standing in the corner of the room, filming from behind her phone. But no one says anything." Nancy could hardly breathe, her thoughts racing. She had felt it, that creeping sense of being watched, those moments when her skin would prickle, when she'd feel like someone was just behind her, but when she turned around there was no one there. Now, it all made sense. "I need to tell HR, Nancy said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. "No, don't," Linda said, grabbing her arm to stop her. "HR's part of it. They've been covering it up. They know. No one wants this to get out. If you say anything, it could ruin everything, your career, your reputation. Please, just be careful." Nancy's mind was in overdrive. She couldn't stay in the office knowing someone was filming her without her consent, invading her privacy in such a sinister way. But Linda's warning about HR, the people she trusted, sent a chill down her spine. "I'll handle it," Nancy said, her voice firm. "But I need to know where the footage is. How do I stop this?" Linda hesitated, her eyes darting to the door as if she expected someone to come in at any moment. "I don't know exactly, but I've seen Sarah with a hidden camera before, and I know she's uploaded the footage to a cloud service. It's how she's been keeping it all organized." The words hung in the air like a ticking time bomb. Nancy's mind raced. She had to get that footage, destroy it, and expose Sarah for what she'd done. But how? "Be careful," Linda warned one last time. "Sarah's not the only one involved, Nancy. There are others who know. It's a web you don't want to get tangled in." As Nancy walked back to her desk, the walls of the office seemed to close in on her. She could feel the eyes of her coworkers on her, though she couldn't pinpoint who was watching. Was it Sarah? Was it someone else? The unsettling feeling was overwhelming, and Nancy knew that from this point forward, nothing would ever feel the same again. She couldn't shake the thought that someone, somewhere, was always watching, and the question that haunted her now was, who could she trust? And that concludes this week's chilling journey into the unknown. We hope these tales have left you looking over your shoulder and questioning the darkness around you. Craving more horror? Subscribe to our YouTube channel for even more terrifying tales. Until next time, remember, there are always more nightmares waiting to be told.